What happens when two seemingly ordinary sisters, enjoying a peaceful evening, suddenly find themselves up against a gang that has no idea what they're capable of? The sheer chaos that erupts will defy every expectation and reveal truths no one could have anticipated. This battle for justice will leave you stunned. How it unfolds is beyond anything you can imagine. Inside a cozy little diner nestled in Chicago, the warm air was rich with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon. Kayla and Tamara Johnson had chosen this serene spot for a well-deserved break, a place to relax after grueling weeks of rigorous military training. To the casual observer, they appeared like any other pair of women enjoying a calm evening out. Kayla, with her leather jacket and composed demeanor, carried an air of quiet confidence. Meanwhile, Tamara, dressed in a crisp white hoodie, wore a friendly, approachable smile that softened her otherwise intense aura. The sisters sipped their steaming mugs, the conversation flowing effortlessly. They exchanged stories from their missions and playfully debated who had the sharper aim. But their tranquil moment shattered in an instant. The sharp crash of the door slamming open pierced the air, drawing every set of eyes to the entrance. A group of 5 men barged in, their loud and obnoxious laughter bouncing off the walls. Yet, their laughter wasn't joyful. It carried a sinister undertone. The leader of the group, a man with a shaved head and a Confederate flag tattoo stretching ominously across his forearm, scanned the room with a smirk that could send a shiver down anyone's spine. When his gaze landed on the sisters, his smirk twisted into something predatory. "Well, what do we have here?" he declared, his voice loud enough to echo into the kitchen. "Double trouble, huh?" The atmosphere inside the diner shifted immediately. Conversations died mid-sentence, forks clinked awkwardly against plates, and patrons suddenly found their meals fascinating. Behind the counter, the waitress, a young woman named Julie, froze in place, her hand hovering nervously over the coffee pot. But Kayla and Tamara? They didn't flinch. Exchanging one of those silent sibling glances that spoke volumes, Kayla's eyes narrowed, a subtle reminder to stay calm. Tamara, with a raised eyebrow, seemed to silently ask, "Is this really happening right now?" The leader wasn't finished. One of his gang members, a wiry man with a patchy beard, swaggered toward the sisters' table and leaned against its edge, his weight tilting it slightly. His voice was slick, dripping with false charm. "What's a couple of girls like you doing here?" he sneered. "Shouldn't you be somewhere else?" Kayla set her mug down with deliberate precision, her movements calm and measured. Meeting his gaze directly, her voice was steady but firm. "We're just here for coffee. Move along." The man didn't back off. Behind him, his friends chuckled, a low, mean sound that seemed to make the air heavier. The leader sauntered over, yanked a chair from another table, spun it around, and sat down in one smooth motion. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table as a cold grin spread across his face. "Oh, you think you can tell me what to do?" he mocked, his voice sharp and condescending. "You've got a lot of nerve for someone who doesn't belong here." Tamara's grip tightened on her coffee cup, her knuckles turning white. Behind the counter, Julie shifted nervously, her eyes darting between the gang and the sisters. The tension was suffocating, the air practically buzzing with unspoken threats. Kayla, sensing her sister's growing frustration, placed a calming hand on Tamara's wrist, a silent reminder to hold steady. Turning back to the leader, her voice remained calm and even. "We're not looking for trouble. Let's not turn this into something it doesn't need to be." For a fleeting moment, it seemed her measured words might diffuse the situation. But then the leader leaned back, laughing, a cold, hollow sound that made the other diners shrink even further into their seats. "Oh, you think you're in charge here," he jeered, glancing back at his crew. "Boys, I think it's time we show these two who really runs this place." The gang began closing in, their voices growing louder, their taunts sharper. The small diner felt like it was closing in around them, the gang's presence oppressive and menacing. Yet the sisters didn't waver. Their calm, unflinching composure only seemed to anger the men more. One of the gang members reached out, his hand hovering toward Kayla's shoulder, a sneer twisting across his face. For just a fleeting moment, everything seemed frozen in time. But in that single, fragile second, the storm Kayla and Tamara had tried to avoid came crashing down. The instant the man's hand landed on Kayla's shoulder, the game was over for him. Without a shred of hesitation, Kayla's body reacted as though it had trained for this moment her entire life. In one fluid, decisive motion, she grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it behind his back, and shoved him forward with precision. The sickening crack of his knees slamming into the table echoed across the diner, followed by a sharp, pitiful yelp of pain. For a heartbeat, the diner fell into stunned silence. Even the low hum of the refrigerator seemed to hold its breath. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, all hell broke loose. The gang leader, now humiliated and seething with rage, let out a guttural roar, a sound that was more bark than bite, and lunged at Tamara with all his might. But Tamara didn't even flinch. With effortless grace, she sidestepped his attack, her movements smooth and calculated. Before he could regain his footing, she delivered a precise kick to his ankle, sending him sprawling to the ground. His head hit the linoleum with a dull thud, and a groan escaped his lips, his bravado crumbling into confusion. Who are you two?" he spat, his voice shaking as he scrambled back to his feet, a flicker of fear now evident in his eyes. But Kayla didn't bother answering. She was already locked in with two other gang members who thought numbers might give them an advantage. Spoiler, they were wrong. The first man swung wildly, his fist cutting through the air with a force that could have hurt, if it connected. Kayla leaned back just enough to let the blow miss before stepping in and delivering a sharp elbow to his ribs. The impact sent him staggering into a nearby booth, clutching his side. The second man decided to up the stakes, grabbing a chair and hoisting it above his head. He swung with brute force, but Kayla ducked beneath it with ease. Before he could recover, she jabbed him hard in the gut, leaving him doubled over and gasping for air like a deflated balloon. Meanwhile, Tamara faced her own challengers. One of the gang members, emboldened by the chaos, pulled out a knife. The blade glinted menacingly under the diner's flickering lights, a big mistake. Tamara's eyes narrowed, her focus razor-sharp. Before he could react, she closed the distance between them in a blink. With a swift, controlled motion, she grabbed his wrist and twisted it just enough to force him to drop the weapon. She followed through with a shove that sent him stumbling backward, his confidence shattered. The knife skidded across the floor, coming to rest under the counter where the waitress, still trembling, clutched her phone with shaking hands. The gang leader, now visibly panicked, tried to rally his battered crew. "Don't let them win," he shouted, but his voice cracked under the weight of his own desperation. The commanding confidence he once exuded was gone, replaced by the unmistakable tremor of fear. In a last-ditch effort, he grabbed a glass bottle from a nearby table and hurled it at Tamara, hoping for a lucky hit. But Tamara, with reflexes like lightning, caught it midair as if she were plucking a leaf from the wind. She placed the bottle back on the table with deliberate care, almost mockingly, and locked eyes with the leader. Her gaze burned with quiet, simmering intensity. "You're outmatched," she said, her voice calm but loaded with undeniable authority. "Walk away while you still can." The weight of her words hit him harder than any punch could have. The gang, now reduced to a group of battered and humiliated men, began retreating, dragging their injured comrades along with them. The leader hesitated, his eyes darting between Kayla and Tamara as if calculating his odds. Spoiler alert, he had none. Just as they reached the door, the shrill wail of sirens filled the air, growing louder with each second. The unmistakable flash of red and blue lights painted the diner's windows, and moments later, two squad cars screeched to a halt outside. Officers poured into the diner, weapons drawn and voices sharp. "Hands up! Nobody move," one of them barked, his tone leaving no room for argument. Kayla and Tamara exchanged a glance, their expressions calm and unreadable. Of course, it had come to this. Slowly, they raised their hands, their movements deliberate, as they began to explain the situation. But their efforts didn't seem to matter. Despite the shaky testimonies of a few brave witnesses and the waitress, who was still huddled behind the counter, the sisters were cuffed and led outside. Their calm demeanor never wavered, even as they were placed in the back of a squad car. The gang, meanwhile, received far less attention from the officers. Whether it was fear, bias, or sheer negligence, their bruised and battered state seemed to afford them an unspoken pass. The injustice of the situation lingered like a bitter aftertaste, but the sisters remained stoic, their silence speaking louder than words. The leniency shown to the gang was as glaring as it was infuriating. While a few of the men were pulled aside for questioning, not a single one of them was cuffed. The leader, now flaunting a smug grin despite his earlier humiliation, strutted past the sisters as they were loaded into the back of a separate squad car. As he passed Tamara, he leaned in close, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for her ears. "You haven't seen the last of us," he hissed, his tone dripping with menace. Tamara's jaw tightened, her fists clenching subtly at her sides, but she bit back a retort. Kayla, ever the level-headed one, gave her sister a small but firm shake of the head, a silent reminder that now wasn't the time. Yet, as the squad car door closed behind them, the fire in Tamara's eyes spoke volumes. This wasn't over. Not even close. The police station was a different kind of battlefield, cold, impersonal, and suffocatingly sterile. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, adding an edge of discomfort to the already tense atmosphere. Officers treated Kayla and Tamara not as victims, but as suspects, their questions laced with veiled accusations and condescension. "So, special forces, huh?" one officer sneered, flipping through a thick file with exaggerated disinterest. "Guess that explains your approach back at the diner." Kayla, her demeanor as unshakable as ever, met his gaze evenly. "My approach," she echoed, her voice calm but sharp. "You mean defending myself when I was attacked? Isn't that exactly what anyone is supposed to do?" Across the hall, Tamara faced a similarly dismissive interrogator, his tone thick with suspicion. "Your training makes you dangerous in situations like this," he suggested, his words more accusation than observation. Tamara let out a humorless laugh, the sound cutting through the room like a knife. "Dangerous?" she repeated, her tone biting. The only danger that night was 5 grown men harassing 2 women. Funny how you're not asking them about their choices. While the sisters endured the relentless grilling, Ray Dixon, the gang's leader, was busy spinning his own narrative. Leveraging his network, he spread a twisted version of events, complete with heavily edited footage that painted Kayla and Tamara as the aggressors. Overnight, headlines began to emerge, sensationalizing the story and conveniently ignoring the gang's role as instigators. But the sisters weren't about to let the lies go unchallenged. Tamara made a call to their commanding officer, who quickly activated a network of powerful allies. Within hours, the tide began to turn. Unedited footage surfaced, showing the gang's provocation and the sisters' measured responses in stark detail. Eyewitness testimonies and security camera recordings backed the sisters' account, exposing the ugly truth for all to see. Social media erupted. The hashtag Justice for the Johnson sisters went viral, sparking a wave of outrage. The public demand for accountability grew deafening, forcing local news outlets to backtrack on their earlier, biased narratives. The sisters didn't stop at simply clearing their names. They stepped into the spotlight, holding a press conference to dismantle the lies with unflinching poise. "We defended ourselves because no one else would," Kayla stated, her voice steady but brimming with quiet resolve. Tamara picked up where her sister left off, her gaze unwavering as she addressed the cameras. "This isn't just about us," she said firmly. "It's about every Black woman who's ever had to fight to be seen, to be heard, and to be treated with respect." The impact was immediate and seismic. Under mounting pressure, the police department issued a public apology and dropped all charges against the sisters. Days later, federal agents arrested Dixon and his crew on charges of assault, hate crimes, and conspiracy. The footage of Dixon in handcuffs, his once arrogant smirk replaced by sheer panic, aired on news networks nationwide. Back at home, the sisters finally found a moment of peace. Sitting together on their porch, they watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. The battle was behind them, but the lessons it brought would never be forgotten. "You think they'll stay scared?" Kayla asked, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. Tamara's gaze was steady, her expression resolute. "No," she replied, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "But we're ready for whatever comes next." And as the stars began to the sky, the sisters sat in silence, their bond stronger than ever, a testament to resilience, justice, and the unbreakable strength of two women who refused to back down.